This is Katrin with Disability Rights New York. Welcome to our podcast, Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned. We are here to bring you information on the most relevant topics regarding disability rights and advocacy. Today, we will be discussing paratransit transportation rights with DRNY staff attorney, Sarah Smith. Hi, Sarah. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So this is a big topic, and we've had some current movement on this in our office. Can you talk to us a little bit about our attending the latest ACTA meeting and how that is really working with the MTA and paratransit?
Well, we have a transit accessibility working group here at Disability Rights New York, and our main purpose is to try to get a handle on and keep tabs on what's happening with the effort to really improve accessibility in the New York City transit system. Certainly, there's more than New York City who we represent, and but it is the biggest transit system in the state, and we hope changes here will be, felt around the state in terms of New York City and the MTA setting an example. So there are a lot of things going on in the world of transit accessibility, including some lawsuits against the MTA for their failure to comply with the ADA. And while DRNY is not a plaintiff in those suits or directly involved, we certainly are maintaining, we're certainly watching with interest the developments and the progress of those suits. But also we are looking at what's happening at the MTA in terms of addressing accessibility on the subways and buses, but also with paratransit. There is a population of people who will never be able to use public transit because of physical limitations, mobility limitations, vision impairments, cognitive disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires that those people have fundamentally equal access to the same service. And what that is and what it's called under the law is complimentary paratransit service. The reason that we started by talking about the Advisory Committee on Transit Accessibility is because their most recent meeting was a very well-attended one. Disability Rights New York, we do not have a representative on the committee right now. We have very strong connections to the accessibility team at the MTA, and our colleague Zachary Borodkin did attend that meeting and had the opportunity to actually meet Andy Byford, who is a hero of the Accessibility Committee. And this was a day or two after he had resigned from his position at New York City Transit. But I think Zachary left that meeting really feeling confident that Byford had really set the tone really set up a good system for improving accessibility at the MTA.
And so I would be remiss if I didn't ask about the acronym. I know I said it in the beginning, but it's the ACTA meeting we're talking about. Can you tell me what that stands for?
It stands for the Advisory Committee on Transit Accessibility. It's a fairly new committee that is actually part of New York City Transit. And New York City Transit is is a part of the broader Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which covers regional buses, commuter rails, all of those things. New York City Transit is just the transit system within New York City that travels just within New York City, primarily with subways and buses. And the Advisory Committee on Transit Accessibility was something that was part of the former recently resigned president of the New York City Transit, Andy Byford. It was part of his plan for accessibility. And so he created the position of the first ever person who was in charge only of accessibility at New York City Transit. And one of the other things he did was create this, or his team did, was to work on creating this Advisory Committee on Transit Accessibility, which is made up fully of people who are members of the public who are having discussions about their concerns. And the most recent meeting was focused on Accessoride, which is New York City's paratransit system.
So let's get right into paratransit. Can you give us the legal definition of it and what regulations are required for this service under the Americans with Disabilities Act?
So basically, the Americans with Disabilities Act has many provisions that whose aim is to ensure that people with disabilities have equal benefits and services as people who are able-bodied. And therefore, one of those requirements is that any system, usually transit systems are county-based, any place that there is a fixed route transit system or service for providing public transportation, which basically means a subway rail system that has stops that are always the same or bus stops that are always the same, that's what fixed route service means, must provide complimentary paratransit to people with disabilities. Now, what that means, what the parameters of that complimentary paratransit are, or what that must provide is within a 3-mile radius of a bus route or a rail station, there has to be complimentary paratransit available within that 3.25 mile range. And what it means is that there is shared transportation, usually in an accessible vehicle that's like a van or a bus, a small bus generally, that can accommodate wheelchairs and even stretchers. And those vehicles are ones that people can contact a telephone number to request a ride anywhere from between 24 hours to an hour before they need to go to an appointment. And basically the requirement is that the ride must be scheduled or provided within an hour of the time that the person requested. It can't be, it's not always guaranteed it's going to happen right at the time, but it has to be within an hour, either an hour before or a maximum of an hour after the time. If I ask for a ride at 12 o'clock so I can get to a 1:30 appointment, then the ride has to be provided between 11 and 1.
There's a lot of planning that's involved then with paratransit. So if you're looking for a ride, you need to call anywhere from 24 hours ahead of time to an hour ahead of time. But you also have really a 3-hour swing, right? It could be an hour before, it could be an hour after. So paratransit isn't like Uber or Lyft. It's something that you really have to plan your entire day around. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that is a lot of the conversation and discussion around the paratransit system in New York City, which is what I'm most familiar with in terms of the timeframes. And, it seems that it's challenging logistically to have more than one person in your vehicle and be able to plan a trip that accommodates everybody's schedules and where they're going. And so there could always, I think, be improvement. It's a challenging thing, and you do need to plan quite a bit ahead. And there are certainly flaws in the system. I had a client here meeting about a case, and I watched her try to reschedule her paratransit from Access-a-Ride. And it took almost an hour for her to get what she needed. And so while there is certainly a open dialogue and open communication and avenues for people to weigh in about their concerns about paratransit in New York City, recently they started this pilot program, which has been very popular, which is basically enables people to use their status as an Access-a-Ride customer to use Uber or Lyft, to use ride shares or taxis in the same way. There are some requirements around how much more the taxis can pay, because one of the requirements of paratransit is that the fare cannot be more than twice what somebody would pay on regular public transportation.
Okay, so they're looking at other options, and it sounds like this pilot program is another option, but it could be more expensive. And you've spoken and made reference to, how this is in New York City. Is paratransit different in New York City than in other parts of New York State, or is paratransit, as it's defined under the ADA, is that federal or statewide? Are there differences between those areas?
Very good question. And so one of the things that I did, because even though I have mentioned New York City paratransit a million times, and I work in New York City, I am conscious of not being too New York City centric. And I did start to go through the list of all New York State counties to kind of get a sense of where there was paratransit. And what I will tell you is that generally counties are the entities, particularly outside of New York City, that administer public transportation programs. So if your county has public transportation, it has paratransit. And that is a requirement under the federal law, under the ADA. My advice to anybody is either call or Google your county and then look for how do I contact paratransit. They usually are private entities that contract with the county government to provide this service.
And so how is this different than someone getting a medical transportation service, someone that is uniquely qualified to pick someone up who has a disability that may need some assistance with getting into their ride, getting to their doctor appointment? How is this different?
Well, it's interesting. It's not necessarily different. It's just some paratransit riders might use it to go to a doctor's appointment. However, there's something called non-emergency medical transportation, much of which is funded through the Medicaid program, which basically funds transportation for people, as you described, who need some assistance and may benefit from somebody who's qualified to, handle a stretcher, or someone with particularly an illness or ailment that makes them particularly vulnerable to being moved. You can also private pay for those, but a vast majority of those are part of a benefit of under Medicaid. One thing, when you asked me about the paratransit question of who, federal and local agencies, federal law does define eligibility. However, there's a lot of flexibility for localities to create a system for how to process those applications for eligibility for a paratransit program. And so you really need to look at the specifics of your local county And I also wanted to mention that there is a really good article about paratransit eligibility by the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund.
We will definitely list that link at the end of the podcast. And Sarah, this is a good segue into eligibility. You just touched on it. Talk to us about who is eligible for paratransit and how do you go about becoming eligible for it?
Well, it's very similar to basically the key is to document what your condition is and what your need is for paratransit. And the primary kind of framework for eligibility is set forth in federal regulations. For people who are interested in that, it's CFR section 37.125, 49 CFR 37.125. There are 3 levels. One is unconditional eligibility. And what that really means is you can't use public transportation for whatever reason. You can't use it. It doesn't work, right? That means you're unlimited in your ability to use paratransit. And then there's something called conditional eligibility, which is a step down from that, or it's also called category 2, which means you could use accessible public transportation, but you don't happen to be anywhere where there is an accessible route, meaning there aren't kneeling buses in your neighborhood, or there is a big giant staircase at your local subway station. So therefore you need paratransit to get you to a place where you can access accessible transit. And then finally, there's another category called temporary. I was rather confused by this description. And so I would encourage you to take a look at this article, but also to ask questions and, look at your local county paratransit website to determine how to qualify in this context. But basically, it means you have a condition that prevents you from traveling to or from the regular fixed route transit system, then you could qualify temporarily for paratransit, because the idea is that these aren't in the control of the transit agency. For example, you live very far away, can't walk in the snow and ice from a subway station. Once you get there, you can get on the train, but you can't sell paratransit to get there. Or there are not curb cuts, and so you can't get your wheelchair to the station where there's an elevator, those sorts of things. And so that eligibility, I guess, is sort of contingent on what the status of those barriers are, which can involve weather.
Great. And those are great examples of temporary eligibility. Can you tell me, how do rural individuals factor into this? So if you're a person with a disability who lives in a rural area, and like you said, there's no buses that are coming out your way, you're not on a bus line. And for a lot of New York State, we have many rural areas where services aren't provided out that way. How does paratransit factor in?
Well, that's a really good question. And the reality is the right to paratransit is connected to the existence of public transportation, right? Because a lot of the rights of people with disabilities are very much connected to the idea that they should have equal access. So if you are a person who lives in a rural area and don't have a disability, you also are going to have a challenge getting to the doctor if you don't have a lot of resources, right? So the only option I'm aware of for those people who have income challenges would be the Medicaid-funded medical transportation. But I think what you put your finger on is a gap that isn't covered, because the way the ADA is written, it ties this to public transportation. And if there's no public transportation, then there's no right, because there's no inequality. And that's sort of the legal framework around which it's thought about in terms of disability rights. It's often about identify a right, an equal right needs to exist for a person with disabilities.
So that is a pretty large gap, considering it's not just New York State, but every state has a rural dynamic that would need to be addressed in that way.
Absolutely. I think it's a really, I'm glad you asked that question.
So let's talk logistics. How does someone request the paratransit transportation through the Dial a Ride program? Is it as simple as picking up a phone and making a call?
Well, yes, it is. Often my understanding, like I'm looking right now at the guidance on the, New York City's page about how you call for a ride. You basically go on your local county website, assuming you have a transportation system, a public transportation system, and find the paratransit page, or call your local county and ask for the paratransit department and request a ride. And as I said, there's that hour window, and there is some monitoring of the call. There is some effort to be sure that people are getting the information they need and that the calls are being handled properly. But it is pretty much that straightforward. To my understanding, it's supposed to be that straightforward. The challenge becomes coordinating logistically all those people in a city like New York. And one of the challenges we have in New York, which I've heard quite a bit from our membership about, or our constituency about, is, and this is something they're trying to address, the GPS machines that are used in access-a-ride vehicles are very old. They're very outdated. And it's just one of those things that, and for whatever bureaucratic reason, the drivers are not allowed to use their phones. And so this means that the drivers get lost because the GPS systems in the trucks are not up to date. However, we mentioned this in one of our recent meetings with New York City Transit, and they said that they are in the process of upgrading. So that's really good to hear, because that really is more of a logistical challenge than actually ordering the ride.
And really, that seems like a simple enough fix. The technology exists. We all have it. We all carry it in our phones. And it seems like there shouldn't be that gap in technology from being able to find someone where we can all do that individually. The service certainly should be able to do it.
Yes, absolutely. I think so, too. But sometimes, you'd be surprised. Sometimes my Uber drivers can't figure out where they're going either, and they have their phones.
All right, so let's talk about the rights of individuals who are using paratransit services. What rights do they have? Are they something that, is it a Bill of Rights that can be accessed somewhere? What can a person expect when they're using paratransit?
Well, first of all, big one is that the fare for the basic paratransit service. Now, there are paratransit systems that add on premiums that you can pay for, meaning perhaps more predictability. One big right that a paratransit rider has is, and the distinction between the non-emergency medical transportation and paratransit is, you don't prioritize based on where somebody's going. And you really shouldn't even ask anybody where they're going. That's the idea, right? You get to go where you're going. If you're going to a doctor's appointment, great. If you're going to the beach, that's fine also, as long as it's within, there's a bus stop somewhere nearby. So there's no ability to say, well, this person's going to the doctor, so we're going to get them there first. And I think the local agencies do have some flexibility in terms of how they prioritize their rides otherwise, but that is one thing. It's not relevant where you're going. Also, it cannot be more, as I mentioned earlier, than twice the cost of a fare on regular public transportation, and the hour window. If you have a personal care attendant who's accompanying you on Access-a-Ride, they ride free. It's another right. And you have the right to complain. You have the right to file a complaint. So all providers have to have a system in place and information for people about how to make those complaints. I know we had a case one time recently where one of our staff identified, I believe, that the number was incorrect. So the people who were trying to call and complain about the problems they're having with accessibility were not getting the correct number. And so we were able to make that correction and get that. But that's a really big deal. So, that kind of segues into, if you have questions or problems, give us a call. And if we don't have the answer off the top of our heads, we'll find it.
That's great information. That was going to be my next question for you, and you answered it. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about paratransit and what people should know?
I would like to say we'd love to hear from you about what your experiences are and your challenges are, particularly upstate, particularly with respect to, these rural areas and, what you're experiencing and ideas and thoughts you have about what might work. Because I think you really put your finger on a big gap in service when we talk about places that don't have public transportation. So I encourage people to also reach out to us if you have questions or concerns, because even if we can't take your case to court and fight the fight to the Supreme Court, we certainly can give you guidance and support and point you in the right direction.
And that's true. To our audience out there, any feedback that you have about paratransit, whether you've had great experiences or you're having difficulties, or if you have ideas about it, please let us know and comment below. We would love to hear from you, and certainly maybe even do another podcast topic on it. So, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. It's really been great speaking with you.
Thank you.
Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned has been brought to you by Disability Rights New York, your source for disability rights and advocacy. If you enjoyed our program, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this post. If there is a subject you would like us to discuss, please email podcast@drny.org or comment below. Tune in next Wednesday, where we'll bring you more information on disability rights in the state of New York. The closed caption version of this podcast is available on our YouTube channel. To listen to more Empire State of Rights Closed Captioned, follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.